Let me take you back to a time when everything felt perfectly ordinary, when life seemed like we were just your average couple. We had been married for 3 years and everything was okay, I suppose. Many moments faded into one another, like that terrible seaside motel we vacationed at for our first trip, or the day we bought our house, which we thought would be our forever home. Emma and I fell into our routines, enjoying our morning coffees and engaging in random discussions about work or weekend plans. We felt like we really understood each other, even if there were underlying issues we chose not to acknowledge. Yet, there was always this cloud hovering over us, the issue of children. More specifically, the conversation around having kids. Whenever the topic surfaced, I quickly changed the subject. It wasn't just that I wasn't ready. I simply couldn't be. She had no idea about my past decisions. I never found the courage to share that secret with her. Right after I turned 18, I made a life-altering choice. I underwent a vasectomy. You might call it teenage rebellion or something similar, but I vowed never to bring a child into this world to endure the same nightmare I had. I had witnessed enough in my own upbringing to swear off fatherhood forever. So, during our marriage, every time she dropped hints about wanting kids, I had an excuse ready. Not yet, babe. Or, let's focus on our careers first. I had a whole arsenal of justifications. Sure, she complained from time to time, but eventually she seemed to let it slide, at least for the moment. I became quite adept at sidestepping the conversation, until one fateful night when everything changed. We were enjoying one of those quiet dinners at home. Nothing fancy, just the two of us. Out of nowhere, she gazes at me with a dreamy expression and announces, "I'm pregnant." Just like that, with no warning, no build-up. She looked at me, expecting me to react as if it were the most joyous news I could ever receive. And honestly, it should have been, had everything been normal. But it wasn't. The instant those words left her mouth, my mind went blank. And then reality hit me like a freight train. I knew for a fact that child couldn't possibly be mine. Let me tell you, suspecting your wife is cheating is one thing, but having it practically shoved in your face is something else entirely. I tried to keep my composure, forcing a smile and nodding along while feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath me. She continued to babble about how excited she was for us to become a family, raving about baby names and mapping out our bright future. All I could do was sit there, feeling like a complete fool, trapped in my own home. I struggled to suppress this overwhelming mix of rage, confusion, and a strange emptiness in my chest that wouldn't let go. After that night, I started noticing things, details that had slipped under my radar before. For instance, how she always laid her phone face down on the table, how she suddenly received late-night texts, brushing them off as work-related, how she seemed far too eager to go out with the girls, only to come home smelling like she'd just left a nightclub. I knew I had to uncover the identity of this other guy, or determine if I was simply being paranoid. And that paranoia, let me tell you, it can consume you. You start overanalyzing every detail, every word, every movement. So I became, let's say, vigilant. Whenever she wasn't looking, I'd discreetly grab her phone and scroll through her messages. She had a passcode, which struck me as odd since we used to share everything. But one evening, while she was in the shower, I finally cracked it. Our wedding anniversary. How cliché. I began scrolling through her messages as if my life depended on it. Yet, I found nothing. Nothing obvious, at least. Just a bunch of random texts from unfamiliar numbers, appearing harmless at first glance. Maybe I was just overthinking everything. I felt like a detective in one of those movies, and trust me, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. The deeper I dug, the more my stomach twisted with a gnawing feeling that I was about to uncover something I really didn't want to see. She acted normally around our friends, so much so that I began to wonder if perhaps I had just been imagining things. She was her usual self, cracking jokes, holding my hand, laughing at silly TV shows as if everything was perfectly fine. But to me, every laugh felt phony. Every touch seemed forced. I couldn't even look at her without questioning the foundation of everything we had built together. When she wasn't home, I'd rummage through her belongings, the closet, the drawers, her laptop, searching for any clue that might explain this mess. I knew it was insane, and honestly, part of me despised myself for doing it, but I felt like I was on the verge of losing my sanity. Meanwhile, she continued to parade around, playing the loving wife, completely oblivious to the fact that I was slowly piecing together this disturbing puzzle. Or maybe she was aware. Perhaps she simply didn't care. Then there were the phone calls, random ones at odd hours, calls she would take in another room, speaking in hushed tones as if she didn't want me to overhear. Each time this occurred, my blood boiled. I thought about confronting her right then and there, snatching the phone from her hands and demanding answers, but I couldn't. I didn't have any proof, just a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. That sensation of betrayal gnawed at me day after day, and no matter how much I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, the tension between us grew thicker. It all reached a breaking point one night while she slept, and I lay wide awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was all right, yet I wasn't prepared to confront whatever truth awaited me. So I did what I thought was best. I continued to watch, listen, and wait for that one slip-up that would either confirm my fears or perhaps prove me wrong. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't mistaken. The storm was on the horizon, and I had no idea if either of us would make it through. After days of trying to act as though I wasn't losing my mind, I finally resolved to confront her. I couldn't keep enduring this twisted charade, pretending that everything was sunshine and rainbows while I was drowning in doubt and anger. I needed answers. No more dodging or tiptoeing. Just the raw truth, whatever that might entail. It was late one evening when I heard her bustling around in the kitchen, humming a tune as she washed the dishes. I walked in, my heart racing, trying to act calm, but I could feel my expression giving me away. She turned to me, wearing that smile of hers, the same one that used to illuminate my life but now felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. "Hey, babe, what's going on?" she asked, as if it were just another ordinary night. And there I stood, ready to drop a bombshell that would alter everything. I attempted to ease into the conversation, casually asking her how she felt about the pregnancy, whether she'd considered seeing a doctor, what her plans were. Trying to keep things light. She seemed so blissfully at ease, excitedly sharing her thoughts about starting this new chapter in our lives. She raved about baby names, painted a picture of what the nursery could look like, even mentioned family traditions she couldn't wait to begin. It was as if she were lost in a fairy tale, completely oblivious to the tension radiating from me. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't act like the loving husband when every word she uttered just fueled my anger. Finally, I took a deep breath and asked her bluntly, "Are you really sure this baby is ours?" She halted mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto mine. Confusion, anger, maybe even a hint of fear flashed across her face. I couldn't quite tell. "What do you mean? Of course, it's ours. Why would you even ask that?" Her tone was sharp and defensive, and I could see she was bracing herself for a confrontation. "I need to know if there's someone else," I replied. Those words felt heavy, as if I were dragging them from a dark pit in my chest. I was trying to remain calm, not to sound accusatory, but let's be honest, I was accusing her. And I knew she recognized that too. Her reaction was immediate. "How could you say that?" she yelled, her voice cracking with emotion. "You think I would cheat on you? Sleep around and get pregnant by some random guy? You think so little of me?" Tears began to well in her eyes as she slammed the dishcloth down on the counter, her hands trembling with rage. "I don't know what to think anymore," I retorted, my voice rising. "None of this adds up. You can't just expect me to accept this on blind faith when I know damn well I can't have kids." That was the point of no return. I couldn't hold back any longer. I got a vasectomy years ago, before we even met. And I know that means this child, it's not mine. You ever watch someone's world unravel in real time? That's exactly what happened in that moment. She stood there, frozen, as if I had slapped her. The silence hung heavily between us, and for a second, I thought she might deny everything, concoct some elaborate story to cover her tracks. But instead, she simply crumbled. She sank to the floor, sobbing, pulling at her hair as if trying to tear the truth from her very being. You lied to me," she gasped between sobs. "You took that choice away from me. You never told me, not once. How could you do that? You knew I wanted a family. You knew I wanted kids, and you lied to me." For a moment, I almost felt like the villain, like I was the one who had wronged her. But then it hit me. She was the one pregnant with another man's child. So I pressed on. "You had a choice, all right. And you made it, didn't you? Just once, huh? That's all it took?" And that's when she finally broke down. "It was one time," she shouted from the floor, tears streaming down her face. "One mistake, one stupid night, and I didn't think this would happen. I never meant for any of this to occur." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. All those suspicions, sleepless nights, the paranoia, it was all justified. She had been with someone else, and now she was carrying his child. My stomach twisted in ways I never thought possible, like I was going to vomit out all the betrayal that had been festering inside me. "One time," I scoffed. "One time, and you just happened to get pregnant? And you thought what? That I'd never find out? That I'd just step into the role of daddy to some random guy's kid and never question it?" I couldn't even look at her anymore. All I saw was a stranger wearing my wife's face. She kept crying, mumbling apologies that felt meaningless to me. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, okay?" she whimpered. But there was no taking any of it back. I was done. Done with the lies, the secrets, and the pretense that we had ever been happy. "That's it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotions that had been tearing me apart inside. "I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce." And with that, I turned and walked out, not looking back. I could hear her sobbing, calling after me, pleading for me to come back, to talk, to make things right. But there was nothing left to salvage. She had broken us. All I could do was leave the shattered pieces behind. I got into the car, slammed the door shut, and sat there gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had no clue where I was heading, no idea what I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't be anywhere near her. It felt like my entire world had shattered, and I had no idea how to begin putting it back together. And just like that, everything came to a screeching halt. The life we once shared, the marriage we had painstakingly built, the dreams that danced in our heads, gone in an instant. I was just a guy slumped in his car, staring blankly at the desolate road ahead, utterly clueless about where it would lead me next. You don't often think about what follows the explosion, do you? When you're right in the thick of it, throwing accusations, slamming doors, uprooting your entire life, you don't pause to ponder what's next. You're fueled by adrenaline, hurt, and raw anger. But once the chaos settles, and you're left alone in the eerie silence, that's when the reality hits you. That's when you realize you must figure out how to start fresh, how to rebuild your life from the ashes. After storming out that night, I was without a plan. I crashed at a friend's place for a while, one of those pals who says, "My home is your home," yet never really means it. Eventually, I understood I needed my own space, somewhere that didn't smell like pity or remind me of our shared past. So I found a rundown one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't anything special. Drab white walls, creaky floorboards, the kind of place where neighbors barely acknowledge one another, but it was mine. It was the one sanctuary where I didn't have to see her face or confront the lingering ghosts of our relationship. I wish I could claim that the move brought me peace or closure. The truth? It was absolute misery. Every morning I woke with an aching emptiness, a hollow pit in my stomach that wouldn't disappear. I couldn't even bear to look at my own reflection without feeling like a colossal failure, a man who couldn't keep his marriage intact, who had been blindsided by betrayal. And the anger, oh, that relentless, festering anger aimed at her, at myself, at the world. It clung to me like a dark shroud, dragging me down day after day. Let's talk about guilt for a moment. You'd assume all the blame would rest squarely on her shoulders. She was the one who cheated, who deceived, who turned our lives into a grotesque caricature. Yet, a part of me felt guilty too, guilty for not disclosing my vasectomy sooner. I kept thinking, if I'd just been upfront from the beginning, maybe none of this would have spiraled out of control. Perhaps she wouldn't have felt betrayed by my secret, and maybe I wouldn't have found myself picking up the wreckage of a life that no longer belonged to me. Every little thing triggered memories of her, of us. I'd be preparing breakfast and would suddenly remember how she used to whip up pancakes on Sundays, pretending she didn't burn half of them. Or I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the overwhelming loneliness would wash over me like a relentless tide, dragging me back into the memories of our late-night chats about everything and nothing. Even the simplest things, like catching a glimpse of her favorite movie on TV, would send me spiraling back into a whirlwind of regret and what-ifs. I tried to dive back into work, throwing myself into my job, hoping it might help me move forward. But I couldn't concentrate. Each email, every meeting, every project felt utterly pointless. How could I care about work when my entire life was crumbling? I'd stare blankly at my computer screen, barely processing the words, only to find myself scrolling through old photos on my phone like some sort of masochist, torturing myself with snapshots of smiles and happy moments that felt like they belonged to a stranger's life. Then there were the friends, the ones who made half-hearted attempts to support me, even when they were utterly clueless about how to help. They'd text me, check in, invite me out for beers or to catch a game, trying to pull me out of the pit I was stuck in. For a while, I played along, slapping on a phony smile and pretending to enjoy myself. But the more time I spent with them, the more I realized they couldn't possibly grasp what I was going through. How could they? They were blissfully married or single, enjoying their lives, not dealing with a wife who had blindsided them with infidelity and a child that wasn't theirs. And don't get me started on the mutual friends we shared, those who knew us both, who had witnessed our highs and lows. Most of them sided with her, of course, or at least didn't openly support me. They'd send me texts like, "Sorry to hear about what happened," or "Hope you're hanging in there." But it all felt so hollow, so insincere. Honestly, the thought of seeing them again filled me with dread, knowing they would look at me with pity and discomfort, just as oblivious as I had been. So I severed ties. I allowed myself to drift away from those mutual friendships, from people who were too closely tied to her, too connected to what we once had. It felt like I was cutting away parts of myself, parts of my past, but it was the only way I could begin to move on, or at least attempt to. Nights were the worst. That's when everything seemed to collapse, when the silence in that apartment felt stifling, as if it were closing in on me. I'd pour myself a drink, or two or three, hoping to drown out the incessant thoughts, desperate to forget, even if just for a fleeting moment. But it never truly worked. The numbness would wear off, and I'd find myself right back where I started, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every deceit, every missed sign that should have warned me she was unfaithful. I would ponder when exactly things had derailed and whether there had ever been a chance to prevent it. Eventually, I attempted to reconnect with some of my old hobbies, strumming the guitar, going for runs, the activities I once cherished before everything crumbled. But nothing felt right. It was as though all the joy had been drained from everything I once loved, leaving me with a persistent sense of, what's the point? I felt like a ghost, merely going through the motions, searching for a glimmer of normalcy in a life that had lost all meaning. I remember one day sitting in a park watching life unfold around me, families with kids, couples entwined in each other's arms, friends bursting into laughter, and feeling like I was observing it all from a distance, like I was a ghost in my own existence. I longed to feel joy, to regain a sense of normalcy, to view the world without that relentless ache in my heart. But I couldn't shake it. All that consumed my thoughts was how everything I once believed in had vanished, leaving me utterly lost, unsure of who I was supposed to be anymore. Then there was trust, or the glaring absence of it. Every time I considered meeting someone new, attempting to put myself out there, it felt utterly impossible. How could I ever trust anyone again? How could I dare to expose myself to that kind of pain? I had poured everything into my marriage, and look where it had landed me. It felt like no matter how much time passed, I would never be able to let my guard down, never believe in anything good without expecting it to come crashing down around me. But I suppose that's the price you pay after getting burned. You start seeing shadows where there are none, anticipating every smile to harbor a hidden agenda, every touch to carry the weight of betrayal. And I despised that. I hated feeling like a bitter, paranoid mess, unable to look at the world without expecting the worst. But what choice did I have? After all that had transpired, after the deceit and the heartache, what choice remained? And so that became my life post-divorce, a constant tug of war between attempting to move forward and being yanked back into the darkness, trying to reclaim fragments of myself that weren't stained by her betrayal. Some days were a bit better than others, I guess, but mostly I was just existing, trying to discern who I was without her, seeking a way to live with the scars she'd inflicted. Months rolled by, and the chaos in my mind gradually started to ease, at least a bit. Time has a peculiar way of dulling even the sharpest pain, and it felt like I was finally surfacing for air after being submerged for too long. I wasn't over it, not even close, but the world didn't feel so suffocating anymore. I began to venture out again, reconnecting with aspects of life I had buried deep in my memory. It was a slow journey, tentative steps back into the land of the living. One evening, after work, I found myself in a bar, a little dive just down the street from my apartment, a dimly lit spot, half empty, with worn wooden tables and a jukebox that seemed to play more static than music. It wasn't much, but it felt right, comfortable, a place where I could sit alone with my drink, free from the feeling that everyone was scrutinizing me, judging the wreck I had become. As I nursed a beer, staring vacantly at the TV in the corner, feigning interest in a baseball game I couldn't care less about, she walked in. She caught my attention, not because she was drop-dead gorgeous or anything cliché, but because she seemed real. Just a woman, on her own, looking for the same kind of escape I craved. She took a seat a couple of stools down from me, and we exchanged a brief nod. That's it. Just a nod. Yet somehow, it felt like the most genuine connection I'd experienced in months. I can't even recall how our conversation began. Probably something trivial. The weather, the band playing in the background, the mediocre beer selection. But somehow, we found ourselves chatting, and it flowed easily. It wasn't like those forced exchanges I'd endured with people who knew my situation and tried to fix me with their pity. She didn't know my story, and I didn't know hers, and that was refreshing. There was no baggage, no expectations, just two people discussing life, music, and whatever else came to mind. Her name was Allison. She had a warm laugh that made you want to join in, even when you didn't understand what was funny. And for the first time in ages, I found myself laughing too. Not that forced chuckle I'd been putting on for my friends to convince them I was okay, but a real, genuine laugh. And damn, it felt incredible. One beer led to two, and two to three. I hadn't intended to get drunk, and I didn't, but I finally allowed myself to unwind for the first time since everything had fallen apart. We lingered until closing time, discussing everything and nothing, and when we finally stepped out of the bar, I felt lighter, like I had left some of my anger and pain behind on that bar stool. We exchanged numbers that night, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't fret about where it might lead or what it could mean. I simply knew I wanted to see her again, to talk to her again, to feel that spark that had been missing from my life for so long. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of tentative first steps. Coffee dates, strolls through the park, dinners at cozy little restaurants that felt intimate without the weight of expectation. We kept things light, no heavy discussions about our pasts, no probing into each other's skeletons. Honestly, that suited me perfectly. I was still too raw, too frightened to divulge what I'd been through, and she seemed content to just be. No pressure, no demands. I recall one evening sitting on a bench overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below us as we chatted about nothing in particular, and then she reached out and took my hand. It was such a simple gesture, yet it felt monumental. Like maybe, just maybe, I could learn to trust again. Perhaps I didn't have to live in fear of being hurt. But that fear was always lurking in the shadows, a persistent reminder I couldn't shake. The vasectomy. That damned vasectomy. It was like an invisible barrier standing between me and anything real, anything lasting. Because no matter how right things felt with Allison, no matter how much I wanted to immerse myself in the moment, I knew that eventually I'd have to come clean. I'd have to share the words that had shattered my marriage, and I couldn't help but worry that it would ruin this too. Every time we grew close, every time we shared a laugh, a kiss, or one of those quiet moments where silence felt comfortable, I could feel that fear creeping back in. What if she wanted children? What if this was a deal breaker? What if she looked at me the same way my ex had, the way she did when I finally revealed the truth, like I was a liar, a thief who'd stolen her chance at a family? And yet, despite everything, I found myself gradually letting my guard down with Allison. Bit by bit, I invited her into my world, the parts of myself I had long kept hidden. She would ask about my day, my work, my life, and I'd find myself sharing thoughts I hadn't voiced since the divorce. She listened with genuine interest, never once pushing me to reveal more than I was comfortable with. It was as if she understood that I was still on a journey of self-discovery, still piecing myself together from the remnants of my past. We'd take long walks, chatting about the most trivial topics, our favorite movies, the worst jobs we'd endured, our hypothetical plans if we struck it rich in the lottery. And as we strolled, hand in hand, I began to envision a future in a way I hadn't in ages. Not a dismal, hopeless future marked by solitude and bitterness, but one that had actual promise and vibrancy. I started to entertain the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, I could find happiness again. But there it was, the burden of that secret. With each passing day of silence, I felt like I was erecting a wall between us, brick by brick. I loathed the idea of keeping something so significant from her, something that could alter the course of our relationship. But how could I tell her? How could I risk losing the one bright spot in this chaotic mess of my life? One evening, after dinner, we were cuddled up on my couch and I found myself gazing at her, truly gazing. For a fleeting moment, I thought, maybe it won't matter. Maybe she won't care. But then the fear crept back in, that insistent voice in my head urging me to remain silent, to preserve our fragile happiness for just a little longer. Because once I revealed the truth, there would be no turning back, no pretending, no more cozy bubble where I could simply enjoy being with her. So, I kept quiet. I kept postponing the conversation, convincing myself I'd tell her tomorrow or the day after, or maybe the one after that. In the meantime, we continued to build this delicate, beautiful bond that felt like it could genuinely become something substantial. I knew I couldn't keep hiding the truth forever. It was consuming me, that secret gnawing at me every time I looked at Allison, every time we laughed, held hands, or kissed. The longer I delayed telling her about the vasectomy, the more it felt like I was constructing this whole relationship on a lie. I had been burdened by it for months, feeling like an imposter, and I couldn't bear it any longer. It was time to come clean. It had to happen now before I lost my courage. So, one Friday night, I decided to make it special. Nothing extravagant, just my best attempt at cooking something that wouldn't be a complete disaster. I set the table, lit a few candles, and tried to appear calm, even though I felt like I was on the verge of a meltdown. I must have adjusted those forks a dozen times, searching for something to do with my hands, anything to distract me from the monumental conversation looming ahead. When Allison arrived, her smile lit up the room, and I forced myself to smile back. She sensed right away that something was off. She always had an uncanny ability to read me. "Are you all right?" she asked, her gaze piercing, trying to decipher what was happening. I assured her I was fine, that I wanted tonight to be special, and that there was something important we needed to discuss. Her expression shifted slightly, a hint of nervousness creeping in, but she didn't press me. She trusted me, and that made it all the more difficult to reveal what I was about to say. Dinner passed in a blur. I couldn't tell you what we ate or what we talked about. My mind was too wrapped up in rehearsing my confession, strategizing how to share my truth without shattering everything. Eventually, I reached a point where I could stall no longer. We had finished eating, and the silence that hung between us felt suffocating, charged with everything I had yet to say. "I need to share something with you," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she stiffened, preparing herself for whatever revelation was coming. "And it's difficult for me to talk about, but you deserve to know the truth." I laid it all out for her. I spoke about the vasectomy I had when I was just 18, how it had seemed like the only way to escape the chaos of my childhood, how it was a choice made out of fear, anger, and a desperate need to take control of my future. I shared the details of my marriage, how I had concealed the truth from my ex-wife, how that secret had ultimately torn us apart. I told her how terrified I was to reveal this to her, scared she might view me differently, that she might feel betrayed, and that she might leave me just as my ex had. The whole time, Allison remained silent. She sat there, eyes fixed on mine, and I couldn't decipher her expression. The uncertainty gnawed at me more than anything else. When I finally wrapped up my confession, I felt as though I'd ripped open my chest, exposing everything, raw, vulnerable, and just waiting for her to tear me apart. But she didn't do that. Instead, she reached out, taking my hand and squeezing it gently, and that small gesture nearly shattered me. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly, her voice calm and steady. I know it wasn't easy. I was at a loss for words. A part of me was still bracing for her reaction, for her to withdraw or declare this a deal breaker. But then she smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that felt like coming home, and said, "It doesn't change anything. I care about you, and I want to be with you. Sure, I've always dreamed of having a family, but that doesn't have to mean biological kids. There are other paths, adoption, fostering, or maybe it's just the two of us. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." In that moment, it felt like an enormous weight lifted off my shoulders. All the fear and insecurity I'd carried for so long began to dissipate. I was flooded with relief and gratitude for her understanding, her openness, her ability to see me for who I was rather than just a collection of past mistakes. I pulled her close, held her tight, and for the first time in years, I felt like everything might just be okay. From that night onward, our dynamic shifted, improved, deepened. There were no more secrets, no more walls between us. We started discussing our future, envisioning what we wanted our lives to look like. We talked about adoption, dreams of traveling the world together, and creating our own traditions, our own family, however, that might manifest. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuine hope, real, tangible hope for what lay ahead. A few months later, we moved in together, and life began to take on a new rhythm, one that wasn't governed by pain, anger, or betrayal. We spent our weekends exploring new places, trying out new hobbies, learning how to laugh again in ways I thought I'd never experience. It wasn't perfect. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but it was authentic and it was ours. Every so often, I'd hear about my ex-wife through mutual acquaintances, people who still lingered around the edges of our lives, even after I had cut most ties. From what I gathered, things hadn't turned out well for her. She had given birth to the child, a little girl, but she struggled, really struggled, with the reality of being a single mother. I heard murmurs about her resorting to alcohol, drinking more than was healthy, trying to drown whatever guilt or regret she carried. People mentioned that she looked different, exhausted, worn down, a shadow of the woman I once knew. I won't pretend that hearing those things didn't affect me. I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, pity, and an odd sadness for what could have been. Yet, the anger had dissipated, that seething rage that used to keep me awake at night. It had transformed into something more akin to acceptance. She had made her choices and I had made mine. We had both stumbled in different ways and life had moved on as it always does. I wished her well, silently, in my own way. I hoped she would find her peace, discover a way to move forward and be the mother that little girl needed. But that was her journey, and I had mine. And for the first time, I was at peace with that. I was okay with the fact that we had both taken separate paths, that our mistakes had led us to different lives. Because in the end, those missteps had brought me to Allison, to this second chance at happiness, and I wasn't going to squander it. Now, as I reflect on everything, not just the divorce but the entire messy journey that led me here, I can see it for what it was, a pivotal moment, an opportunity to learn, to grow, to evolve into someone better than I had been before. And as I sit here, looking at the woman I love, planning a future brimming with possibilities, I realize that sometimes life breaks you down just so you can reconstruct yourself stronger than before. And I'm completely okay with that, because I know that whatever comes next, I can face it with Allison by my side. That's all I truly need.